Well, hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about integration platforms, and in particular, we're going to be talking about our experience over the last 15 years working with integration platforms. My name is Chris Reddick, and I'm one of the founding partners at Clarity. I focus really heavily on the technical side of things, and I'm joined by Ron Halversen, who's also one of our key partners at the company. And Ron, why don't you give a little background on your experience with integration platforms?
Yeah, I've got it. That's an interesting one, isn't it? So, yeah, I've been here at Clarity for about 10 years, but before that, I worked at multiple companies working on integration projects for about the past 15 years prior. So, I've literally worked with many, many vendors and worked on integration for 20 years easily.
Yeah, so needless to say, we're going to be really kind of sharing kind of from a technical background from me and somewhat business related, and then really from a business perspective with somewhat technical from Ron. And we're excited to share what we've seen works, what are some of the pitfalls and challenges with some of the integration projects, and just generally to start with, one of the things we wanted to share first is kind of why folks tend to look for integration platforms and what some of the challenges tend to be. And it's interesting, Ron, because in my personal experience, most of the off-the-shelf tools that, I mean, they've really been around for decades now in different forms and flavors. They do a really nice job with a certain percentage of the project. But one of the biggest challenges that I know I've always seen, and I think you've experienced the same thing, is, man, whenever it gets down to integration projects, you've got to get access to some of the different systems that you're integrating. And many times that's the hardest part of the project. So having a really nice tool that can do a lot, it's almost like having a blueprint for a house. You know, you can have a great blueprint for a house, which is awesome. You know, don't get me wrong, it's really powerful. But you also need all the resources, and you need folks who can put those different pieces together in the way that the blueprint requires. And so that's been one of the biggest things that I've seen, and kind of the biggest challenges is not just having the right technical tools for an integration that are really powerful, but also having a complete team that can deliver on getting access to the systems, doing it securely, making it robust. And what are your thoughts on this, Ron?
Yeah, well, I would say probably half of the clients that come in, and again, just as a background, if you don't know who Clarity is, we've been in business for 15 years. We've done over 1,300 websites and over 3,000 integrations. So this is literally what we do. We do dozens of them every month. And about half the integrations that come in are people who have had some kind of, and I'll call it an integration tool. It's usually like a plugin or something that's given them basic, like, I can send sales orders from my Shopify store into my QuickBooks, right? Something like that. But as soon as they want to do any customization, they have to come to us. So about half of them are ones that have already had some kind of, and I'll just call them a tool or a plugin. And then the other half are ones looking for a robust integration, and they know it up front. They know they need a true platform. So what I see the problem is a lot of times is they'll get a plugin that automates one piece of their business, right? One simple workflow, like pumping in a sales order. And it might even do the reverse where it'll update the tracking status of that sales order. But then they come along and go, oh, okay, well, now I want to do custom quotes, or I want to do returns, or I want to do warranty repairs. And oh, by the way, is there any way to start, especially with the pressing personalization, right? For the last couple of years, personalization is really being pressed on, right, to increase marketing conversions. So now as they're getting into personalizations, they come back and go, now that I'm pushing the sales orders to and from QuickBooks, is there any way for me to take all of my clients' and customers' behavior, like what they're browsing, what they're buying, what they're doing, how many times they logged in, and start pumping that up into my CRM so I can start getting some sales insight as to their behavior and what they're doing? And those off-the-shelf tools don't do any of that. So they're coming to us typically where we're sitting down, and it's more of a consultative approach where it's like, what's possible? Most of them don't know what they don't know. And with us, we're literally looking at the technology, assuming we can do everything, because that's what we do, right? And so we literally sit down and talk about, what do you need to drive your business, to change your business, to increase your business? what can the integration do to help automate and improve and drive and accomplish those goals? And we document that first, and then we'll go in technically and figure out how to do that integration, and then that's what we implement, right? So it definitely shows very quickly, I need the ability to build a building, not just have the Legos to stand up a building. It's a lot different, right? When you actually need to construct Legos that don't exist.
Yeah, that's right. And the reality is that some of these tools are really powerful, and that includes the Clarity Connect platform that we've built. They're really powerful, but the thing that we want you to take away is it's not just the tool. You're also looking for the team that's supporting it. And for many of our clients, they have a really strong internal team that can do most of the work. So, you may be best looking for a tool that can facilitate and really be kind of the last mile that you need for your internal team that's really capable. For most clients, though, that's not the case. And we really want to make sure that you kind of understand what you're getting and what you're not getting with a tool like Clarity Connect and then other integration platforms, be they SaaS or on-premise. And ultimately, there are some really key criteria and capabilities that are important with these tools. So we're going to be talking about those today. But the other thing we want to encourage you to keep in mind is, like Ron, like you were saying, we want to go over the overall plan with your team and determine who's going to do what and make sure that you have the resources to be able to accomplish your goals for the project. Many, many, many projects that that have a lot of focus on using a particular tool as their solution, they aren't actually utilized in the long run because they don't actually solve the business problems. And they're not able to they can't get across the finish line, right? Because they run into issues that they didn't predict. So that's why we recommend more of a white glove type of interaction. And what's great is because of the efficiencies of the process with a tool like Clarity Connect, companies like ours, we're able to offer white glove support as part of our offering that complements the actual tool itself. And so we just encourage you to think about this and think about where your company, what your organization and your capabilities are with regards to the different systems that you're integrating. Does your team or do you have vendors that you're working with have the ability to expose securely the APIs and the endpoints to be able to get access to those systems in the way that your integration tool needs? And in particular, have you tested and validated that this is all going to work properly? And do you have the resources to do that? And then in addition to that, do you have the knowledge about this integration tool that you're going to be using to be able to execute with that particular tool in the time frame that you need? So anyway, with that, that's kind of a high level overview of what we're going to be covering on today. And feel free, Ron, if you wanted to kind of go into any other details on the overview here.
Yeah, I think probably just a simple one is since we're going to be talking about Connect, let's go ahead and just kind of break it down into the components, because there's really two main components to the Connect platform, at least the way that I see it from a sales perspective. I talk about the platform itself, which has, and I'll let you talk about the platform capabilities. And then around the platform, we have connectors. And the connectors, I like to refer to them as kind of like the little translators, right? So if I wanted to connect someone who speaks Japanese to somebody who speaks French, I got to have a translator that speaks one or the other, but it's almost like the Connect platform is the one that can speak every language. And then around the end is the one that talks to the API that can speak that language for each platform. Right. So I've got one guy out on the end that can speak French, and I've got a gal on the other side that can speak Japanese. And then they turn around and take the information and pop it into the middle, and then Connect. The platform itself is what takes and handles the data, transforms the data, manipulates the data, and does all that kind of stuff. So we're probably going to be talking in today's discussion about the platform itself, and then talking about the connectors. So the connectors, as I said, handle the field mappings and handle the translation of the data. Can you talk a little bit about what's included in quote unquote the platform itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So the platform itself is very key within the overall context. At least it's very important that it has certain minimum criteria or capabilities. So what you want to look for with any integration platform are queuing capabilities. So having the ability to set up discrete jobs that are queued so that the data is persistent whenever it's going across the wire. And if for whatever reason a system is offline or possibly there's maintenance, there could be an error or some kind of a, unexpected issue on the receiving end or the sending end of a job. We want to make sure that that job can continue to stay unresolved essentially, and have a dashboard to be able to see the status of this, notifications, etc., so that basically any task that is required or necessary uh, gets persisted until it completes. And if there are any issues, that information and the detail around it gets shared up to the team through a dashboard, notifications, other forms of self-healing. In addition to that, we typically are looking for some form of scheduling and periodic schedule on a what's commonly referred to as essentially an atomic level, or kind of per task that's running. So every type of task or workflow that needs to run, it can be discretely set for a particular schedule. And the schedule can follow some very advanced rules. So it can queue based off of changes to records. So essentially it can run on demand in real time, or it can run on a periodic schedule. So think of a cron job as an example, and be able to run on a very specific schedule. And Ron, if you want, feel free to share any examples that you might have on that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, on the queuing one, I mean, I loved how you talked about the queuing one. And for me, thinking about that, it's like if I had 10 sales orders that came in and I had some kind of network hiccup and I didn't put those sales orders into the ERP for fulfillment, and those blow up, I don't want those sales orders gone. I mean, that's literally money straight out of my pocket. So the queuing mechanism for Connect can take all those and do retries. It'll literally move it into a queue that, as Chris said, is persisted. So it can literally retry until it reconnects or allows you to go fix what that error is and then invoke and trigger the sending of those things as they're in this queue, basically ensuring you don't lose any data. So I think that's a huge important one for the queuing. I love that. The scheduling one, when I typically see my clients use this, a simple example would be, what if in your ERP you've got 700,000 SKUs and you're trying to pull all those products back into the storefront, and that takes, I don't know, let's make it fast, 15 minutes to run 700,000 product updates. Well, you're obviously not going to run that in the middle of the day and clog up your whole entire integration. So you might want to create unique, independent integration tasks and have all products synced at maybe 2 a.m. every day. On the other hand, if you're customizing pricing or you're changing inventory counts as you're fulfilling throughout the day, you might want to run inventory every 10 minutes. So it says, hey, just get my inventory. That's all I need to be on the website. Pricing and inventory has to be really accurate and really fast. So the scheduling allows us to create individual integration queries and then schedule them to run at different intervals, or they could be called in real time as well, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And what you were talking about there with this large amount of data is a great example of where data storage and caching and possibly data manipulation really makes sense. And we'll kind of get into this as we go. But basically, one of the things that you want to look at with your integration platform is it going to mechanically be able to deal with large amounts of data? And is it going to be intelligent so that it can deal with scenarios where you have a master record, but you have updates coming in from different sources, and maybe there are field level master delineations. So you could say for a product record, the SKU and the price and the inventory data is coming from an ERP, but the marketing metadata is actually living as a master inside of an e-commerce system. And so we need to be able to have this powerful kind of delineation between the source of record, if you will, as well as things like when a order goes through a certain status, we need to be able to manage with business logic that is easy to configure and easy to set up within the integration platform. If it's in this status, this is the source of record. The e-commerce is the source of record when it's a new order that's a web order, for example. And then once it goes into fulfillment status, now the ERP is the source of record. Mm-hmm. And so these are just some examples, but does the system you're using have this capability? And so just in general, I would love to hear, Ron, if you have other examples on that as well.
Yeah, the master data management is great, right? For example, we have this with a lot of clients where, let's say Clarity signs up as one of your customers and Clarity can purchase on account. Now, Ron and Chris are contacts at Clarity. So Ron and Chris may be able to log into, let's say, if the portal's an e-com storefront, and I can change my name, my phone number, my email address, etc. But Clarity filled out a contract, and the sales rep put that contract and that relationship in the ERP. So Ron doesn't have rights to change that. So in the master data management model, Ron can edit the fields about his personal contact information, but he can't go in and edit and muck up any of the fields that were set up at the contractual level in the ERP. So like you said, some of the entity's source of truth is the ERP, while others live inside the storefront. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love that.
Agreed.
Well, since we've kind of gone through what's in the platform, let's talk about the different types of architect. I mean, it sounds like, just from the cursory explanation, that that's a pretty big enterprise level platform. Does it have to live in an enterprise? I mean, what's the different types of architectural installations that we can handle with a platform like this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically with most integration platforms that you see out there nowadays, most of them offer a SaaS-based scenario. So that's typically referred to as iPaaS, Integration Platform as a Service. There are some platforms that also offer hybrid or network or on-prem, and they can offer kind of hybrid scenarios where they're not just on-prem and they're not just cloud-based, but they can kind of live in both. And I would say that's really what we've found to be the most powerful is being able to check the box on being hybrid, pure SaaS, or pure network, depending on the client's needs, and being scalable and performant and redundant within a particular environment. The biggest takeaway that we've seen over these many years is that most clients don't need a complicated solution, but there are a handful of client scenarios where they do. They need a robust scenario where they have high availability. Maybe there's a significant security requirement that requires a certain level of VPN point-to-point configuration, and the environments where those maybe it is a hybrid scenario where those hybrid systems are talking to each other have to be through a VPN tunnel of some kind. These are just kind of examples here. But generally speaking, the types of architecture that we've found that are least limiting are hybrid and the ability to be able to be pure SaaS or pure network where needed. And the big takeaway is that going through discovery, which we typically will do, is if you wanted to think of it like this, if you're going to build a house, you need to get a blueprint, and we'll probably work with an architect for certain parts of the blueprint, and then use a really well-designed plan. We do the same thing with choosing the architecture for a project. And the other big thing is looking at the types of integrations. This can really, really make a big difference, just as far as the overall just concept of what makes sense for architecture. What systems are we integrating? Where do they physically reside? And what type of interactions can we have with those systems? So are they SaaS-based, and do they have certain limitations? Is there a security concern or a high availability requirement? Is there a performance or scaling concern? These are all areas that we really need to get into, and whatever connect or integration platform you're working with, you really want to work with your vendor to make sure to flesh these things out in advance. And Ron, I would love to hear some of the scenarios that you hear about that might exemplify some of these situations.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, that's kind of very interesting because there are different types of integrations. And I don't mean like integrating with an ERP or a CRM. I'm talking about the actual physical connections themselves because you may not always need uh, a platform if a tool does exactly what you need, right? So I kind of break them into three different categories when I get these. I call a simple API call, single persistent, and bidirectional persistent. So let's briefly just break those down and talk about it. A simple API call, for example, if I went to install a quick WordPress site with WooCommerce and in the checkout cart, I wanted to connect to UPS so that I could say, how much does it cost to ship this package from X to X? Or I wanted to connect to an API that could say, what's the exchange rate right now with the Canadian dollar? And it gives me a value back. I'm making a simple API call across the internet. They're giving me a value. I'm plugging that value on the screen, and then I'm going on. I'm moving on through a workflow. I don't need to persist that connection. I literally asked a question, it gave me an answer, and off I go. Typically, those types of API calls don't need an integration platform, right? It just has to, the checkout cart or the form or whatever you're doing has to be able to make that call and have the appropriate credentials to get that call, get the response, and use that data. So those ones are usually straightforward. And when we're really talking about these integrations, we're typically not talking about those types of integrations, although that's probably the most important or common, not most important, the most common, right? Because we're connecting things like Avalara sales tax and carriers and LTL carriers and credit card companies and things like we're connecting with simple API calls all the time. Single persistent would be like we do a lot of medical. And so we have a HIPAA compliant pharmacy app that we're doing, right? And I sign up on that app and I get a new prescription and I go to get that prescription filled. And let's say it's a controlled substance like OxyContin or something like that. Well, as soon as they put that prescription into the system, that system could have a one-way read only to the FDA's API saying, hey, Ron has this. Can you check all of his other prescriptions and see if there's a conflict with Oxy with any of the other medications he's taking? That's extremely helpful information. That would be a single persistent integration, right? Where we're either pulling data one direction or potentially pushing data one direction. I have a lot of affiliate integrations where people are like, I need my own e-commerce store, but I want to be able to push a button and push that product and make it for sale up on Amazon or eBay. That's an affiliate one-way connection where we're pushing things up there. The bidirectional persistent, that's where most of our integrations really lie. And that's when people are like, hey, I want to connect the doctor-patient portal with the hospital. So the client, I can pull data from the EMR and have all the doctor appointments available so the patient can look in, see the available appointment times, schedule their appointments. Those appointments get pushed back up and scheduled. The doctor can then send them an invoice for their copay that goes back down, and then they pay their copayment that gets pushed back up. Reminders can be sent down to the user to let them know their appointment's coming up. Their lab results can be pushed into the EMR that could then be pulled down to the portal and then notified. So it's this truly bi-directional persistent integration where these become extremely important because we can literally automate and make sure that the old cliche, right? Get the data where it needs to be when it needs to be. But that's really what the key is about integration. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. It ends up typically being some form of bidirectional in most cases for most businesses, just because they really, I mean, otherwise they're going to have to do things manually. And that's kind of what we're trying to do in most cases with these integrations is make things self-service for the end users, make things automated for the internal team, and just try to maximize value for time that's going in, and allow the business and the customers to focus on value add activities versus monotonous tasks, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, another way to say it, I mean, we build websites. Why do we build websites? Well, because all of our clients, their customers are clients. The UI for them, either they have to pick up the phone or email or come visit them, or if they hit the website becomes that user experience, right? It's kind of the front of the house. And if we can get all of the information to the front of the house, or if we can get the collection of data to the front of the house. Like when I go to my dentist now, I don't have to go to the dentist, sit in the waiting room for 15 minutes anymore to fill out all the paperwork the first time, do I? I can literally go to the portal or go to the website and click on initial forms or ongoing forms or onboarding forms, whatever email they send me. I can print them out, fill out the forms and take them with me and hand them that, or I can fill them in online before I even show up the first time. So I think the big thing for us when we go to do this is not only automating a lot of the business process, it's because we're interfacing as a customer, right? As our clients, they're interfacing with their customers, and the interface now, instead of phone and fax and email and brick and mortar, the only UI these customers have is a portal. And so in order to get the data to and from that portal, I mean, that's kind of the key to the entire thing working, isn't it?
That's right. And this next slide really kind of talks about some of these different systems that we integrate with. And this is really something whenever you're evaluating an integration platform that you really want to ask yourself is, what systems, as you were saying earlier, Ron, these different translations that are possible, what are these systems that the integration platform can talk to? And the way I would say it with our integration platform is really anything that that your team wants to integrate with. We're showing here integrations that we've commonly worked with and completed many projects with, in some cases dozens and dozens of projects with these different platforms. But essentially, any system that does have a pretty standard kind of API, basically this can be EDI, XML, SOAP, REST, it can be database. Really, the list goes on. Punch out catalogs, any kind of newer API framework like gRPC or Fire, HL7v2, HL7v3, etc. We can integrate with. But whether you're looking at Clarity's platform or another platform, we do encourage you to kind of think ahead and kind of think about where you're going with your business and where you're going long term. And this is the really interesting thing, Ron, that I like to ask people to think about. Does your team internally have the ability to expose the APIs with these systems? And if you don't, what's your plan? And we really at Clarity, we have dozens and dozens of pages in most cases for these platforms that we're showing on the screen, and many others that we've written of internal documentation for how to securely and in a very high availability performant way expose the APIs for these different respective systems, and how to work with your vendors if you have a vendor, or how to work directly with the companies that are shown here to get access to a sandbox, development environment, non-production first, and then be able to kind of turn that on for development and testing, and then to be able to switch to production and kind of complete the right steps to respect the business logic and the workflows that are part of your particular implementation of these different respective platforms. And that's really a key missing ingredient, like we were talking about earlier, right, Ron? Whenever people are looking at platforms, they kind of myopically focus on, what does it say that it can do?
Yeah.
But you need more than that. You need a partner who can actually take the blueprints and the raw materials and turn it into a beautiful executed build. And that's really what we want to encourage you to think about looking at all these scenarios.
Yeah, that middle one there, it appears to be the shortest, but that's even the most important. I see that a lot where clients will come in and I'll start talking to them, and they've taken a swag at these plugins and they've done some integration, and they're integrating and exposing and breaking HIPAA compliance rules by they're connecting an email to an EMR, and now they're violating HIPAA and sending out protected data. So yeah, like you said, one of the most important things is make sure you've got a partner who actually knows what they're doing, so that you don't put yourself in a legal position of going in internally going, well, we're smart enough to figure this out. All we really need is this little tool. You grab this tool, and the next thing you know, that tool helps you literally violate some government regulations. So make sure you find a vendor that plays in that space, understands the rules, and can help ensure to protect your business legally. That's a big one. So obviously we've done 3,000 integrations over the 15 years, right? And I've been here 10 of them, but it used to take us, I remember, even 7, 8 years ago, it used to take us a long time to build these connectors. And it felt to me like we used to have to, every time I had to estimate a connector, it started from scratch, right? But it doesn't seem to be that way anymore. Aren't a lot of these now using like the same basic workflows or API protocols? How does that all work?
Yeah, it basically you tend to see a lot of REST, and you tend to see a lot of in some of the older platforms, SOAP based APIs. But man, whenever you get into the details with how you would customize something, most of the time what we find with our clients is that they come to the table thinking that these different platforms that are using REST or SOAP or maybe Fire, or they have EDI, etc. It's just as easy as mapping some fields and maybe doing some data transformations inside of the integration platform. But most of the time, what we find is to really enable self-service for customers, or to enable full automation or significantly full automation with internal objectives. For fulfillment or for other, workflow processes, for example, they have to actually have the ability to customize these different respective systems, because they don't actually do what's needed off the shelf. So you really end up needing someone that you're working with for each of these particular integrations that can utilize the REST and the SOAP that's very common, but have the depth of knowledge with each respective system around how to customize them, or at least point a vendor that's working with them in the right direction on how to customize these systems. Many times, Ron, in my experience with executing on these projects, the vendors who are specialists in these particular ERP, EMR, EHR, CRM systems, e-commerce systems, they don't actually have specific knowledge with customizing the way that clients need. So
yeah, that's true.
Pretty surprising.
Well, it is. And, half of our integration jobs that come to us aren't the clients, are they? It's the partners that come to us and they're like, hey, we're in working on, and we'll just take the one right in the middle, Epic. We're in here working on Epic at our client, and now we don't know how to hook that up to a patient portal or a mobile app or online billing, or so like you said, they either don't know how to customize that application on the end to automate or get the benefit out of the potential automation, or the other way around, they know how to customize the heck out of their application, Epic, but they don't know anything about the API and now how to turn that customization that they've done inside of Epic into real profitable processes, right? Like putting it into a patient portal where you can allow patients to schedule their own appointments and pay their own bills and see their own lab results and invite and do their own consent forms to allow their information to be shared with another doc. All that kind of stuff can now just be easily automated, and we do that readily, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly it. So, and that really kind of plays to our next kind of topic, which is kind of choosing between these different implementations, because whenever you're looking at ERP systems, CRM, possibly EMR, EHR systems, a lot of the choice between going with an on-premise solution versus a SaaS-based solution or a hybrid is essentially dependent on things like security. It could be physical access. So a lot of times we'll set up a hybrid environment where the ERP system is I would refer to it as a classic, or a a relic. It's maybe another way to refer to it. And so it actually needs to have what we would refer to as a agent, an integration agent that's going to run kind of on premise, but that can talk to the SaaS-based implementation of a connector. And so the idea is that basically we can leverage lightweight agents that get deployed for these older systems. It can also be used for, very secure environments to really lock things down. The actual connector can be fully deployed internally behind physical firewall infrastructure. And so, yeah, I would just be curious, Ron, if you were to talk about just kind of some of your experiences with, where these get used and just some of the business scenarios that these apply to.
Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. So I'll try to hit on a couple different ones. The easiest one is to talk about the SaaS. So Chris mentioned iPaaS earlier, right? The integration as a service, the integration platform as a service. So for example, if you had something like a Shopify hosted storefront and Salesforce, which is a hosted CRM, you don't have anything. You don't have any of that software. It's just like chase.com. You have to log in to get your bank account. All that's up online. So when somebody comes to us and says, can you integrate my Shopify with Salesforce? The most likelihood or the most likely scenario would be for us to, up in the cloud, put a server that can run the platform so it can talk in the cloud to the Shopify hosted storefront and the Salesforce hosted CRM. So that would be your standard SaaS-based implementation. And that's typically when people have, a portal up in the cloud talking to another hosted service or another install up in the cloud. That's usually what it makes sense. So we'll do a hosted or a SaaS-based integration. The on-premise ones, though, I still think are much, much more common. And that's really about the ERPs and the EMRs that, like Chris called classic a minute ago. They've been around for 15, 20 years, and they still are. So that would be like, your Dynamics GP or hospitals running Epic or something. They're installed on a data center behind a firewall in a DMZ, highly secure area at a hospital. And now they've got this mobile app that's a patient app, and they want the patients to be able to schedule appointments. But they want to be very careful, obviously, about what data would be exposed out to that portal. So typically what will happen, like Chris said, this lightweight agent will typically spin up a VM or something behind the hospital's firewall on premise in their environment that can openly and securely talk to the EMR application, or it could be Oracle or NetSuite or any ERP at that client's infrastructure on their network talking securely. Now, our little VM where Connect is running, we can take the IP address of that VM, define a custom port, and have login credentials and have kind of a 3-tiered security that is the only entity that can talk to and from the online portal up in the cloud. So now instead of poking a hole in the firewall and exposing the entire EMR or ERP out to the internet, we're only exposing Connect on a specific IP, specific port with specific credentials, and only the information it has access to. So it's much, much more secure. And so that's kind of what this on-premise / cloud hybrid is that we can have Connect behind that firewall. And I would say most manufacturing, most distribution, most companies that have been around for 20 or 30 years, that's 90% of the time what their environment is, because they've got a significant investment in that on-premise line of business application that they've been using forever. Enterprise QuickBooks, JD Edwards, HP Financials, all of those are typically still running on-prem and have for 20 years. So whenever we have to integrate with these online portals, that's where these on-premise to cloud hybrid integrations occur.
That's right. And just a few points on that. We also you were talking about the security side of things. Those are just some examples with some of the kind of protocols that we use to lock them down. A couple of other things that we see quite often, and this can be pure SaaS, this can be a hybrid or a full on-prem, but we do a lot of point-to-point VPN. And this can be in a SaaS environment where we can have, two kind of SaaS systems connecting over point-to-point, depending on what they support. And so ultimately, the main thing is that whenever we're integrating the data and we're dealing with, like the example that you gave, Ron, was a great example. Maybe it's sensitive medical data that we want to be really careful with. Well, in that particular situation, having point-to-point VPN plus all the other protocols that you mentioned, it just helps everyone sleep well at night, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah, the security is a big one. So let's jump in then and let's talk about how we get started on these things. I mean, because I'm kind of up front in the sales side of it, right? So a client comes in, I tell them we can do it, and then off they go, and I kind of hand it off to the team. So how does the team get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we typically run what we refer to as a discovery, and you can kind of think of this like you would if you were designing a house to then be built, and you basically work with an architect to kind of design things out. And a lot of times you're going to start with some ideas in mind, and so we have a basically a self-service kind of process that your team can engage in, where you can get access to training resources and overview that allows your team to kind of independently utilize templates and guides to then go through and build out mappings, workflows. You can also work with our team to basically walk us through your system, and then we can, utilize this kind of walkthrough with a recording, going through your day-to-day operations. They could be currently manual, and really capture 80 and 90% of what your workflows are going to be by just kind of recording and observing what your team currently does, maybe partially manually, maybe partially in an automated way, and then kind of listen to your team narrate. This is a great way to get information quickly with busy teams. So kind of the first option would be more self-service. The second option where we're recording things would be kind of a hybrid between, self-service for a good portion of the this kind of discovery process, and then our team kind of working with you. For many clients, they're extremely busy, and they basically want a very white glove type of walkthrough. And so in that scenario, we really bring our full discovery team to bear, and we're essentially running discussions within your team and basically serving as a very direct extension of your team. You can almost think of us as virtually being a direct team member within your organization for this time period of this project. And then we're executing on getting all the information that we need. So this will include, working with different business units potentially, certainly working within your team to talk with the different folks who have access to the different systems, and coordinating and mapping everything out. So we kind of have three different flavors around that we typically will consider doing this for.
That makes sense. I've seen us do the white glove, especially when like doctors' offices and professional offices, lawyers and things like that, when they come in and they don't have IT on staff. So there really is nobody there to drive setting up a dev environment and dealing with credentials and literally driving that integration project. And that's where we've had to go in and kind of call it a white glove service, but literally run the entire project for them. Let's talk a little bit then. Let's do one step deeper, right? Let's go a little bit deeper into the actual integration itself. So I talked about the three different types of integrations, right? The simple API call, the single persistent one direction to the FDA API. But we already said that most of these are bidirectional persistent integration. So let's take an example and walk me through an actual example. And I talked briefly about, a sales order goes one way and the shipping tracking status comes back. That would be a bidirectional integration. But dive in a little bit and really tear into technically one of these workflows, if you will, and kind of explain it to us.
Absolutely. So one of the most common workflows that we see, for example, with e-commerce integrations, is there will be category data, product data, inventory, price data. We may have customer specific pricing, and then for the products themselves and the categories, there may be meta information on the site. And all of this data needs to be, appropriately up to date, and it needs to be accurate. And it tends to have different source of record between the ERP, possibly other external sources, and then the e-commerce application. And so just in a very simple hypothetical scenario, the ERP may be the source of record for the SKU, for the product title, for the probably the product name, the SKU, the pricing, the inventory, the customer specific pricing. and let's say that that's it. Then the e-commerce system, if it doesn't already have the record, so you can kind of see this in the workflow diagram on the right, it doesn't already have the record, then it's just going to take all the data from the ERP. So the connector is running and it goes through business logic. In this bidirectional concept, it's going to say, hey, you already have the record in the e-commerce? Nope. Okay, here's all the data from the ERP. We don't want to not bring in data that's available in the ERP. Okay, great. So then one of the marketing team members goes through, and many times we'll have a custom workflow that's in place that says, hey, marketing team members, we've imported these records. They're marked as not published because we're waiting for you to put the marketing content in there. And so they're new items that got added to the e-commerce platform by the integration. So the marketing team will go in and they'll update the meta titles, meta descriptions, add really nice pictures, and maybe do other things to customize them, give them custom URL, etc. Well, we don't want to lose that data next time the integration runs. And some connectors will do that. So, the workflow would then run again after this marketing content has been pushed, and it would say, aha, I see that the data has been updated in the e-commerce system. Maybe a certain status has changed. And so now I want to respect these fields that are in the e-commerce system, and possibly, depending on the business, maybe even bring this data back into the ERP. So there you would have a situation where some of the fields, not all of them, some of them would be in the e-commerce as essentially a source of record in the e-commerce for some of the marketing content, and that might get pulled back to the ERP so it can be used within the enterprise for other sources, and then the data that's in the ERP may have also been updated recently with new pricing, or maybe there's a new product name and that needs to come in. And so these are just some examples of things that the integration platform needs to be able to handle, bringing in updates from the ERP while respecting updates that have been made in the e-commerce and vice versa. So bidirectional on a field level and being able to follow business logic, there may actually be a status change, Ron, with an order. And based on the status change, we need to respect fields whenever they're in a certain status level in a different system as the source of record, which is really, really cool. I mean, you can do some really cool things whenever you have this bidirectional, multi-field based workflow. But hopefully that's a good example, just very high level example there.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense because most of the time businesses are taking care of pricing and inventory and things about their products in their ERP. But on the other hand, the customers are initiating invoice payments, requests for quotes, refunds, warranty repairs, and orders. They're initiated on the other side. So there's a significant amount of data on both sides that kind of the master source of truth originates from the opposite end. But that data has to flow back and forth, especially, I mean, you look at some of our e-com, it starts as a quote in the e-com and then goes into a quote in the ERP where the sales team then has to set a price, generate a quote, approve a quote, which gets then sent back to the UI where the user gets notified, and then they can convert that quote to an order, and then the order goes back to the ERP for fulfillment, which then turns back into a ship status and then goes back, and then the order, let's say the product shows up damaged, then they have to go into that UI and initiate a return or a replacement, which might initiate an RMA workflow. I mean, we've seen some really in-depth workflows, and that's just one piece of one product being purchased that generated all of that integration work.
That's right. Yeah, and fundamentally, that's where the value is getting these rather brittle and precise workflows with key sequencing that has to occur to be as automated as possible. I mean, really, is it such that the business has the full automation that makes sense for the business? Right. A lot of times there needs to be a manual step, but if the technical side of things is the limitation, that's a problem. Mm-hmm. If it's just a business workflow that it makes sense from a business perspective for something to be manual, no problem. But you really want to understand, is the partner you're working with, are they able to implement these really granular aspects. And that's a great segue into customization, ongoing maintenance.
Well, it is, because how many of our clients, and I know the answer is well over 50%, right, come to us because they've had a tool that they've outgrown, right? So they
Bingo,
bought
at least 50%,
if not more, right?
Unfortunately.
Yeah, they bought a tool. And I mean, I know that's how a significant reason why, and I've worked with Clarity for 12 years. I became one of the partners 10 years ago, but I was a client. I was your client for 2 years before I joined the team.
That's
and
right.
Back when I met you guys and we started, I remember talking to you one time, and we were having this conversation, and I asked, why did you get into this business? Because back then you'd only been in business like 3 years. And I said, why did you get into this business of building a platform and building your own e-com if you were really in a services business of just building websites? And your answer was really interesting. And basically you'd said something along the lines, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I remember you talked about it and said, well, when we started, we were consultants, and we would sit down with a client and we would talk through all their custom scenarios and what they wanted to automate and how they wanted to run their business. And then as soon as we got that information, we would have to go see if there was some off the shelf product we could find to use that could be customized. And then we would do the integration from scratch and we would deliver it, and it worked really, really well. And this was the interesting part for the initial delivery. But then you went on to say, no business is static. Every business changed. They divested. They acquired other divisions. The companies just grew. Their clientele changed. They added more products. Every single business morphed and changed. And when they would come back to you and ask for those customizations, you said half the time you were like, no problem. And then the other half the time it was, sorry, that off-the-shelf product we picked a year ago can't do that, but we had to start over from scratch. And you said that's really what led Clarity into building their own platform, because you never wanted to not be able to be customized and grow and expand or contract or change with any business's needs, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's interesting because if you look at some of the SaaS-based platforms, especially if you're looking at kind of the benefits, the pros and cons of SaaS, it truly is one of the biggest downsides to a SaaS-based model, especially a multi-tenancy model. And this is most of the SaaS platforms that are out there today. They're going to have some limitations. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can't do what you need for your first phase of your project, and that may be fine. But we encourage clients to really look further down the horizon and really understand kind of where things are going to evolve or potentially evolve, so you can kind of project forward. And one of the big things that we recommend looking for is, can the system that you're working with currently do some of the intricate customizations? Do they have the really ongoing maintenance to be able to handle some of the upgrades to your systems? Because one of the things you need to understand whenever you're working with disparate systems is you're going to need to upgrade and patch those systems from just a pure security perspective, if not the functionality enhancements, etc. And so whenever these things change, it can break the integrations, and it can change the protocols for the integrations. And this can cause a lot of challenges logistically if you don't have good ongoing maintenance. But yeah, whenever you talk about customizations, it kind of raises the hair on my arms because it truly is one of the biggest challenges that you see with multi-tenant SaaS systems. And like you said, that's why we started doing this. That's where we really saw a huge value to clients, is being able to provide this kind of unlimited capability. Just to kind of be specific here, whenever we do implementations, they're typically implemented as a single tenancy SaaS solution, which gives basically the majority of the benefits of being SaaS based, with all of the benefits of being able to fully customize. And so I think that's a huge strength that folks need to know about, and just understand the limitations. If you do choose to go with a lower cost solution or a solution that is SaaS based, be aware of what the limitations are going to be. And in particular, understand what it's going to take to customize the system, because that's usually about 80 to 90% of the cost that is going to exist long term is going to relate to how many customizations there are and what kind of maintenance there is. That's really where your cost is going to grow if you're trying to fully automate your processes. It's not going to be just the cost of the tool. It'll be the cost of actually implementing your business fully, and customizing to cater to your business.
Yeah, I agree with that. I want to talk about two things. One, I'm gonna mention something, and then I want you to talk about securing the data, because that's a big one. But for me, one of the things that's been very interesting, I don't know what else to call it, data manipulation, data calculation. We really haven't talked about it, but this is where I've seen so many other platforms fall down. For example, we had a client who just had an e-commerce storefront and an ERP, and then they introduced Amazon into the mix. Typically not a big deal, right? You're pushing your products up to Amazon to be sold. The problem occurred was every 2 weeks, instead of in real time, every 2 weeks, Amazon Central would send down the sales record of the money that they were being paid. Well, the problem would happen, and I'm just going to give a quick example. They would sell 4 items on Amazon. Those orders come down in real time. So now in the ERP, they have 4 items, and let's say they each sold for $25, just to make it simple. So now in their ERP, they show 4 items, they fulfill it, they ship it, they're gone. Now, one of the people, whether they're being dishonest or not, they return that item. Well, they don't return it to them. They return it to Amazon. So they request a refund on Amazon. So now on the 15th, when their sales record comes down, our integration is trying to reconcile the dollars that are finally paid from Amazon with their ERP fulfillment. But the payment from Amazon comes down and said only 3 units are sold at $25 a piece, and there is no one-to-one line matching. It's out of sync. So one of the things we had to do for this client is if the items that came down from Amazon at the connect level, we would sync, and if they were a one-to-one match, we would tag the item in the ERP sold. If they didn't match, we actually built them an administrative interface that they could log into a web interface, and they could see everything that did not match. So they could go through and reconcile and say, well, which 3 ended up being paid and which one was the one that was returned, because that information didn't come down from the sales record. So they'd actually have to go figure out which one initiated a return. And then in that interface, they could go through and tag which one of the records is actually been paid, which one was returned. So we had to do some additional data manipulation. And I've seen where people have had us turn Connect's database into a data warehouse where data from both sides of the integration were stored there, and then have us throw Power BI or one of our reporting solutions on there. So I've seen some really interesting things with data manipulation. Even pulling a sales order in, we go out to Avalara, check to make sure it's a viable shipping address. If not, edit the address in line before we pump that address into the ERP for fulfillment, things like that. So data manipulation and calculation can definitely be something you're going to want to know. But I'd love for you to go into securing the data and some of the different protocols and compliancy issues that we deal with, that we address with our integration platform.
Absolutely. And yeah, what a great point on the data manipulation side of things, and automating that where possible. It can be huge to be able to scale. And just, along those same lines, being able to customize for specific security requirements. There are so many security requirements nowadays, mostly because there are a lot of breaches, unfortunately, that occur. And it's expensive for the end users, that have, real issues because their data was, breached and taken advantage of. In addition, it can be really expensive for the organization to be able to try to resolve that or patch up their credibility, and maybe even impossible to do. And so it's very, very serious overall. And so yeah, ultimately, whenever we're doing an integration, especially if it's incorporating very sensitive data, then we want to work with your team to understand kind of what the data is that is sensitive, and help your team understand certain requirements if you don't. So, we're not lawyers here, but we do have a lot of experience working with, HIPAA or NIST, CMMC, GDPR, dealing with, PCI DSS and other different compliance needs. And so we can really help get you started going in the right direction. We work with a lot of partners who basically help then work with a lot of partners who basically will do audits of your internal systems and work with your internal team to make sure your entire process is HIPAA compliant, for example. And then as part of that HIPAA compliance, also audit and work with our systems to make sure that they're constantly patched and kept compliant. And so anyway, the point is that whenever we're implementing our connector, we're looking to bring to bear some knowledge and experience that we've had in your respective areas of security needs. And in particular, we're happy to bring partnerships that we've had a lot of success with into the relationship to help kind of expand your capability there and make sure that things run seamlessly for your organization. And then specific to our connector, from a technical perspective, we have the ability to do some really interesting things. And I'll just give a few examples here on, but just for the HIPAA scenario, as an example, we do have the ability to persist data for caching and performance purposes. And as you can imagine with HIPAA, that can be a really major concern if data is cached and persisted. Most clients choose not to persist data that is secure. Maybe it's PHI data, for example. But ultimately, if there's a need to persist data, we can encrypt it at rest. We can allow the system to enable robust logging for HIPAA compliance. We can enable a very specific key vault system so that all of the data that's encrypted is only decryptable on an individual account level or customer level, for example, or key record level for the data, so that every single record has a unique encryption within the already encrypted system. And then we can further encrypt that by tokenizing the data and storing the secure data in another vault that only shares with us a unique identifier that we then have to log in to be able to get the secure data out of the vault. And without boring you with all the details, the point is that the system that you're working with, it really ought to be able to handle very specific needs for security purposes, mostly making sure that the entire system is sanitized of any secure data. Whenever these integrations are running, you don't want to leave data in your connector and your integration platform that could get compromised. So most of the time, the big requirement here, Ron, is just to make sure that it doesn't stay around, after the job completes. But in some cases, if it does need to be persisted, it needs to be persisted securely. And then we recommend working with partners that we can bring to bear and work with you on to identify the best solution. But partners who can help you with an automated reach and automated patching and kind of compliance requirements tool, so that you can employ that, and then possibly, depending on the complexity of the compliance needs, an actual compliance team that can help you with your whole enterprise implementation of compliance, not just on the technical level.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Especially, our largest vertical that we deal with in the 10 years I've been here is medical. We do a lot with medical, and it always seems like HIPAA compliance and some of the other compliance is really important. But even then, with doing some of our e-commerce and overseas, dealing with NIST and WCAG, and now the real big push on ADA and Bobby and all this kind of stuff, it just seems like compliancy and protecting your business seems to be one of the most important things, almost as important or more important than the technology you select itself. So while you're out looking for a technology, make sure you look for a vendor or partner who actually has experience in these areas and can help you to ensure that the business is protected, and don't give you just a great deal to throw a technical solution in and potentially expose you legally. So in selecting a vendor, one of the other things too that people ask me when I talk to them about these deals is the cost. right? How much are the costs of these things? And it's kind of interesting. Our model, I feel, is definitely different than many. I see so many when I was talking to a couple people last week, and they said, well, the tool that we're using, and they called it a tool, the tool that we're using charges us every time it makes a query. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, because it's a SaaS-based solution, every single time it makes a call to the other platform to move data, it charges us for a call. It charges us for every record that is collected. So as our business grows, the cost of this solution just goes up and up and up. But they're not even persisting the data in the middle. They're just literally transferring data, but they're charging them per query, per record transferred, and then they're charging them an annual maintenance fee. So their solution is literally going up and up and up, even when no work is being performed whatsoever. So it's almost like you pay the 500 grand, you move into the house, and even if they don't do anything with the house, just because they have to come and mow the lawn, they're going to charge you more than what the house cost over time. It's just kind of crazy when I see these costs. So one of the things that we did as a ownership here at the company, we decided to come up with a model where it's kind of like a set of Legos. I can build anything I want with the Legos, but I got to buy the set of Legos first. So once I own the Legos, I can go in and build anything and I can rebuild. And that's kind of one of the things that we've done with our base license with our platform is we call it the one-time cost. It's a CapEx. You can pay for the platform. You can pay for the connectors that you need. And then we'll come in and hold your hand at whatever level you want, get the full integration done, and then walk away and kind of convert ourselves from maybe the construction crew to maybe like a handyman, right? Whereas if you don't need our help, I've seen people on our platform that we've done integrations for 7 years ago that have never talked to us. And then all of a sudden out of the blue, they'll call and say, hey, we've upgraded from Sage 100 to Sage X3. Can you come in and swap out that connector for us and fix our new connection into our new ERP? Absolutely. And we'll go in there and do that work for them. So as far as a cost perspective, I certainly think that ours is definitely, I think it's a no-brainer. But again, I'm a little biased. So all I want to do is just make sure you uncover all the fees. I've seen way too many transactional fees included with some of these other platforms. So just make sure to uncover all that before you go. But from a technical perspective, and I know you've talked briefly about some of the benefit, especially around HIPAA and having that experience. From a technical perspective, Chris, why would someone choose Clarity to work with as their vendor and or platform?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Ron. And I would say to be non-technical for a moment, I know this is going to be shocking, but it's really to reduce your headaches. And if you want to make sure that your project is successful, no matter what, and reduce your headaches, Clarity is the right vendor for you. And basically, if you don't choose Clarity or you don't work with us, keep in mind that you're going to need a team at some level that's going to be able to deal with all of the different integration endpoints and be able to make those accessible and work with them securely, make sure that they're working in a sandbox environment, and then be able to convert to production, deal with performance and scaling. And like you said, Ron, a lot of the different compliance needs, HIPAA being one example. And then the other thing is having the ability to customize and adapt. And again, from a technical perspective, this is kind of, just removing the headaches. The business ought to be able to say, we need these things to do this workflow in this way. And, we bring a team of business analysts and technical specialists into the discovery process so that whenever you're kind of initially explaining everything, we memorialize it, document it, and build out a really specific plan for your business. And then we execute against that, and we don't really have any limitations. And any limitations that would exist are typically going to be related to these external systems that we're integrating. And we've continued to build capability over time so that if those systems do have limitations, we can let you know during discovery. We can advise you on how to work around those. And how to kind of bypass some of these challenges that we've seen over the years with these different integrations that we've done. Like you said earlier, thousands and thousands of these different integration workflows. So we certainly hope that was helpful just to kind of give you some background on just overall what to look for in a vendor. And generally speaking, how to reduce your headaches and really enable your business to get the results that you're looking for. And with that, Ron, I just want to say thank you for all of the detail, and thanks to our viewers for taking a look at this webinar today. Any closing thoughts that you have, Ron, for folks that are watching?
No, thank you. We really appreciate your time. Would love to help you guys talk about your integration projects and give you some guidance. And thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Ron. Bye for now.
Bye for now.